close your eyes and imagine a key. Not a modern, jagged thing of steel, but an old iron key, heavy with rust and disuse. It's the key to a room inside your own mind, a room you were born owning, but have perhaps forgotten how to enter. It's the room where your sovereignty lives, your unasked for, ungranted, inherent right to be the sole governor of your own life. Tonight, we are not going to study political theory. We're going to remember something. We're going to listen for the faint, patient whisper of a man who, 3 centuries ago, hid that key for us in the pages of a book, waiting for us to need it again. His name was John Locke, and his ideas are not just history. They're a map back to a version of yourself you may have thought was lost to time. First exploration. What if your mind is a room no king can enter? There is a silence that exists before the world gets in, before the first argument of the day, before the first headline, the first demand on your time, your attention, your peace. It's a private silence, and in that silence, if you listen closely, you can hear it. The soft, firm click of a lock, the sound of a door closing, deep within you. This is the territory we are exploring tonight. Not parliaments, not constitutions, not documents sealed with wax. We are going inward, to the first and most sacred property you will ever own, the inviolable room of your own mind. Picture John Locke, not as a statue in a powdered wig, but as a man in exile. It's the 1680s. England is a country where the king believes his right to rule is literally God-given, that his word is law, and that your thoughts, your faith, your very conscience are his to command. To disagree is not just treason, it is a sin. And Locke, a man of quiet conviction, has had to flee to Holland. His life is in danger for the thoughts he dared to think and write. He sits in a small foreign room. Lamplight pools on his papers. The air smells of ink and damp wool, and he is writing down an idea so radical, so dangerous, it would change the world. He is writing that no king, no government, no power on earth has the right to that inner room. He called it the tabula rasa, the blank slate. Imagine a smooth, cool piece of slate, still warm from the sun, resting in your hands. This, Locke whispered, is the human mind at its beginning. Not filled with the doctrines of kings, not preordained with loyalties or prejudices, just open, clean, a silent chamber waiting for its own experiences, its own reason to write upon it. This was a declaration of independence for the human soul. Because if your mind is a blank slate, then it cannot be claimed by a crown at your birth. It is unowned territory. It is yours. Yours to fill with the evidence of your senses, the logic of your thoughts, the quiet deductions of your own private reason. Can you feel the weight of that? In the stillness of this night, can you sense the borders of that room? It has walls made of your perceptions. It is furnished with your memories. The windows look out onto a world you alone interpret, and the door only opens from the inside. This is the profound, the breathtaking, the terrifying freedom that Locke gifted to us. The freedom to be wrong, the freedom to doubt, the freedom to change your mind, because it is your mind to change. No external authority can force a thought onto your slate. They can shout through the keyhole. They can pound on the door. But they cannot enter, not unless you unlock it from within. This is the forgotten freedom, the freedom of inner space. We spend our days so concerned with the architecture outside, the laws, the policies, the social contracts. that we forget to tend to the sanctuary within. We leave the door ajar, and the noise of the world spills in, cluttering the floor, drowning out our own thoughts. We forget that we are the sole custodians of this space, that we hold the key. Locke's philosophy is that key, cold and solid in your palm. It's the reminder that before you are a citizen, an employee, a follower, you are a sovereign self, a king in a castle of one. And as you drift towards sleep, to that place where the outside world finally recedes, you are returning to your capital. You are coming home, to the one territory that was, and always will be, yours alone to govern. And so, secure in the knowledge of your own inner kingdom, a new question begins to form in the quiet. A question about the world outside your walls. If we are all such sovereigns of self, kings and queens of our own mental estates, how is it that we ever agree to live together? What is the delicate, fragile treaty that keeps our solitary castles from becoming warring forts? Second exploration. Is the social contract a promise or a ghost? Listen to the night. Beyond your window there's a hum, a quiet vibration that's the sound of a world asleep, yet still functioning. The distant glow of a streetlight, the far-off sigh of a car on a wet road. It is order. It is peace. But it is a peace that is not natural. It is something we built. A delicate web of silent agreements so common we've forgotten they exist. We've forgotten the moment we all signed the contract, not with ink, but with our silence, with our compliance. This is the great ghost that haunts our civilization, the social contract. And John Locke was one of the first to try and give this ghost a shape, a name, and a set of conditions. Let's step back into Locke's world, a world still haunted by the echo of Thomas Hobbes, the man who saw the state of nature as a war of all against all. To Hobbes, life without government was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To escape this, he said, men must surrender all their rights to a mighty sovereign, a leviathan, in exchange for safety. It is a permanent surrender, a total abdication of that inner sovereignty we spoke of earlier. Locke, sitting by his fire in Holland, finds this idea monstrous. To him, we do not surrender our rights. We lend them. We appoint a manager, a caretaker, for our collective affairs. Imagine it not as a grand ceremony, but as something quieter, something more organic. Picture a vast, open common at dusk. One by one, solitary individuals emerge from the woods, from their own small clearings, from their self-built huts. They are tired of being their own judge and jury, tired of the constant vigilance required to protect what is theirs. They gather around a central fire, not in fear, but in quiet negotiation. And there, they make a pact. They agree to pool a tiny fraction of their absolute freedom, specifically the right to punish transgressors, and hand it to a neutral third party, a government. Why? To better protect everything else, their lives, their liberty, and that which their labor has mixed with, their property. This is Locke's contract. It's not a promise of obedience. It's a promise of trust. The people are the landlords. The government is merely the hired steward. And here lies the clause that would echo through history, one that found its way into the American Declaration of Independence. If that steward breaks the trust, if it becomes the predator instead of the protector, then the contract is broken. The power returns. It dissolves back into the hands of the people, who not only have a right, but a duty to build a new one. Can you feel the fragility of this? This contract isn't written on paper. It's written in the faith we have in one another. It's a ghost, a shared belief that exists only as long as we all believe in it. When you stop at a red light on an empty street at 3 a.m., you're honoring the ghost. When you pay taxes for a school your children will never attend, you're feeding the ghost. When you accept the result of an election you dislike, you're strengthening the ghost. This contract is both the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing we've ever built. Because it has no physical form, it exists only in our collective willingness to pretend it's real. And as you lie here in the dark, you can almost feel its delicate threads around you. It's the reason you can sleep without a sword by your bed. It's the reason the night outside your window hums with order, not chaos. But Locke's question still lingers in the air, as relevant now as it was then. Is the steward doing its job? Are we, the landlords, paying attention? Or have we fallen asleep in our castles while the steward quietly changes the locks on the doors? The contract is a ghost, and it needs our belief, our vigilance, to live. To forget that is to risk waking up one day to a silence that is not peace, but the void where a promise used to be. And this vigilance, this sacred wearying task of watching the watchers, demands a certain kind of soul, a soul that isn't easily placated, that isn't quickly satisfied. It requires a mind that has learned to live with a rare and beautiful agony, the agony of doubt. Third exploration. Could the most radical freedom be the freedom to doubt? We've journeyed from the inner room of the self to the ghostly contract that binds us to society. Now we arrive at the quiet engine that drives them both, the single, most subversive tool Locke ever championed. It is not a right, not a law, not a claim to property. It is something humbler and far more powerful. It is the simple, profound, and deeply unsettling act of doubt. We live in a world that craves certainty. It shouts its absolutes from headlines and screens. It demands allegiance to simple stories, clean answers, clear sides. To doubt in such a world can feel like weakness, like hesitation, like a failure of conviction. But Locke, the physician, the man of science, saw it differently. He saw doubt not as a failure, but as the beginning of wisdom, the proof of a mind that is alive, awake, and truly free. Return to that lamplit study in Holland. Locke is not just a political philosopher. He's a man of the new sciences. He writes letters to Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton, men who are rewriting the very structure of the universe. He belongs to a revolution, one that's replacing the certainty of dogma with the cautious, humble, step-by-step rhythm of observation. This doesn't just change how he sees the stars, it changes how he sees everything. For Newton, the universe is not chaos ruled by divine whim. It's a magnificent clockwork, governed by laws that can be seen, tested, and understood. For Locke, the same applies to the human mind and to society itself. It's not shaped by divine decree, but by reason, by experience, by evidence. And at the heart of this method lies a beautiful restraint, the quiet acknowledgement that we cannot know everything with absolute certainty. Our knowledge is limited by our experience. We have probabilities, not prophecies. And that's not a curse. It's liberation. It frees you from the tyranny of the absolute. It gives you permission to say the three most important words in any language: I don't know. And from that admission, all true inquiry begins. Now let that idea ripple outward, from the scientific lab into the human world. If we must tolerate doubt in understanding the stars, how can we demand absolute certainty in politics or in faith? This was Locke's radical leap. He argued for religious tolerance, not merely as policy, but as a necessity of reason. Because if no one can know the ultimate truth of God with certainty, then no one has the right to compel another's belief. The attempt is not just tyrannical, it's absurd, like trying to force someone to see a color they cannot perceive. Can you feel the quiet courage in that? To build a society not on an unshakable truth, but on a shared humility about our own limitations. To make room for the heretic, the skeptic, the doubter, not because their ideas are always right, but because ours might be wrong. This is the final and perhaps most difficult freedom. The freedom to live with uncertainty. The freedom to be proven wrong. The freedom to hold your convictions lightly, ready to adjust when new evidence knocks on the door. This is the freedom that keeps the inner room open to the world, without letting the world break in. It's the freedom that prevents the social contract from hardening into a prison of dogma. And as you drift now on the edge of sleep, where logic softens and certainty blurs, you're practicing this very freedom. You're letting go of the day's convictions. You're allowing your mind to float among possibilities. You're doubting the solidity of the waking world. And in doing so, you're making space for dreams. In that quiet, in-between state, you are perhaps closest to the spirit of John Locke. Not a man of rigid answers, but a quiet, patient, courageous seeker, bathed in the soft lamplight of an endless, fascinating night. The father of forgotten freedoms, whose greatest gift was to teach us that it is perfectly okay and profoundly human to not be sure. The treaty we sign with the dawn can wait. For now, there is only the peace of not knowing. Sleep well. Fourth exploration. What does a man truly own if not himself? Close your eyes now and imagine a key, not a modern, jagged thing of brass and precision, but an older key, forged iron, heavy in the palm, cool to the touch. Its teeth are worn smooth by time, by the turning of a lock in a door you've never seen, but perhaps you've always sensed was there. This is not a key to a house or a chest or a carriage. This is a key to a room within you. A room that, for most of human history, others believed they had a right to enter. Kings, priests, the loud and demanding voices of the crowd. They all laid claim to that space. They believed they had the right to arrange the furniture of your conscience, to light the candles of your belief, to dictate the rhythm of your thoughts. And then, a man sitting in a quiet study in Holland, in exile, the cold North Sea mist pressing against the window pane. A man named John Locke. And he took up his quill, not as a sword, but as a locksmith's tool. And with ink and reason, he began to fashion a new key. And then, he slipped it under the door. For you. For us. He called it property. But we must forget for a moment the word as we know it. Forget the deeds to land, the stock certificates, the car in the driveway. That is the small change of ownership. Locke was speaking of the original fortune, the first and final estate. You are your own. Before any government. Before any contract. In the deep, quiet state of nature that exists in the human soul, you belong to yourself, your mind, your body, your labor. These are the unassailable territories of the self. Think of the sheer, terrifying, beautiful weight of that. In a world that constantly asks for your time, your attention, your allegiance, your data, here is a forgotten truth, whispered from the 17th century. You are the sole proprietor. the king of your own consciousness. No parliament can levy a tax on your quiet moments. No monarch can demand fealty from your dreams. Locke saw this self-ownership as the foundation of everything else. When you mix your labor with the world, when you plant a seed in unclaimed soil, when you carve a table from a fallen tree, that thing becomes an extension of you. It absorbs a piece of your life, your time, your effort, and thus it becomes yours. It is a sacred transfer of essence. Can you feel that? The satisfaction in a long day's work, not just for the paycheck, but for the tangible proof of your effort? The chair you built that still sits in your study, the garden you tend, the report you wrote that carries the watermark of your intellect. These are not just things. They are little monuments to your sovereignty, peaceful, productive proof that you are here and that you have acted upon the world. In doing so, you've carved out a small piece of it that is irrevocably yours. This is the quiet, dignified rebellion against a world that often treats us as interchangeable parts in a vast, humming machine. You are not a cog. You are an owner, the first owner. But here, in the soft darkness, let's turn the key the other way. Let's consider the shadow this concept casts. If you are your own property, what happens when you feel you have nothing else? When the labor of your hands doesn't seem to accumulate into security? Or more intimately, what happens when you feel like a poor steward of your own estate? When the mind you own is clouded with worry? When the body you possess feels tired and frail? The philosophy doesn't promise ease. It only guarantees the deed. It says the soil is yours to till, whether it is fertile or fallow. And that can be a lonely responsibility. It's easier sometimes to hand the key back, to let someone else, a charismatic voice, a demanding job, the numb scroll of a screen, tell you what to do with your own inner room, to become a tenant in your own life. But Locke's whisper reminds us, the key is still in your hand. It always has been. The door is heavy, and it may creak on its hinges from disuse, but it is your door. And on the other side is the simple, profound peace that comes from knowing that, in a universe of chaos, there is one small, well-defined territory where your word is law. And you can close that door tonight and be, truly and completely, your own. The sea mist from that Dutch window seems to linger in the air, doesn't it? A haze of profound, personal truth. But a man who owns himself cannot exist in a vacuum forever. He eventually looks up from his own soil and sees his neighbor. And the question then becomes, what happens when the peaceful kingdom of the self meets the kingdom next door? When promises are made and broken? When the quiet of your study is threatened by the noise from the street? This leads us to a darker, more turbulent question, one that stirs in the blood of every free man. Fifth exploration. Is the right to revolution a quiet whisper or a forgotten storm? Every society, every government, is built upon a story it tells itself, a myth of its own permanence. The stone of the courthouse, the gilt edge of the Constitution, the solemn oath of the official. They're all designed to feel eternal, as solid as the earth itself. But John Locke, that quiet man in his study, inserted a fault line into that solid ground. He gave it a name, the right of revolution. It sounds like a thunderclap, doesn't it? The stuff of barricades and burning palaces, of passionate crowds, and the sharp, metallic scent of change. And yes, it can be that. It has been that. But tonight, let's consider it not as a storm, but as a whisper, a constant low hum in the foundation of a free society, the last, final, and most solemn check on power. Locke's reasoning was calm. So calm, in fact, it's easy to miss its radical heart. Government, he said, is a trust. We, the people, are the grantors of that trust. We give up a little of our perfect natural freedom, the freedom to be judge and jury in our own case, and place that power in the hands of a government. We do this for one reason only, to better preserve our lives, our liberty, and our property. The government is the fiduciary. We are the beneficiaries. And what happens when a fiduciary violates that trust? When the government, instead of protecting your property, seizes it? When it invades your liberty? When it threatens your life? The contract is not just broken, it's dissolved. The power, all that power you loaned out, it flows back. It returns to its source, to you, to the people. It is a cosmic undo button, the ultimate withdrawal of consent. Think of that not as a call to arms, but as a state of mind. It is the philosophical foundation of standing back, of taking a slow, measured look, a critical eye. It's the reason a free man does not bow before authority. He assesses it. He measures its actions against the standard of its purpose. This right is the sleeping dragon in the citizen's heart. Its very existence, its quiet acknowledgement, keeps power humble. It's the reason a politician should, in the deep of night, feel a shiver of accountability, not just to the law, but to the people who made the law and who can, as a last resort, unmake it. That's the profound maturity Locke grants us. He treats citizens not as children to be ruled, but as principals overseeing a hired manager. And sometimes, a manager must be fired. But here's the deeper, more personal question for you. Lying here in the quiet, where does this right reside in you? Is it a forgotten scroll in a dusty cabinet of the mind? Has the comfort of order, the fear of chaos, lulled it to sleep? The right to revolution isn't about craving chaos. It's the final safeguard of order, a just order. It's the recognition that some lines once crossed cannot be tolerated. To forget this right, to let it fade into a historical curiosity, is to make the government the master and yourself the servant. It's to hand back the key to your own room. So let this not be a restless thought, but a grounding one. Let it be the source of a quiet, unshakable confidence. You are not subject to raw power. You are a party to an agreement. And that knowledge alone, the simple awareness of that final, solemn right, is the most peaceful and powerful thing in the world. It means your consent is not a formality. It is the very bedrock. And bedrock, as we know, can shift when the pressure becomes too great to bear. That whisper of ultimate authority, flowing back to its source, leaves us with a profound sense of balance and a final, deeply personal tension. For if we are the guardians of our own minds and the ultimate judges of our governors, how do we live with our neighbors, especially the ones who do not believe as we do, the ones who might even seek to undo the very freedoms we hold dear? This leads us to the last, and perhaps the most demanding question of all. Sixth exploration. What price does the tolerant man pay for the intolerant? Tolerance. It feels like a modern word, doesn't it? A soft word, something you hear in corporate seminars and political speeches. It can sound like a passive act, a simple letting be. But for John Locke, living in the shadow of Europe's bloody religious wars, tolerance was anything but soft. It was hard. It was radical. It was the most necessary political calculation of his time. Tolerance to him was the muscle that holds the door open, even when a cold wind blows through. And the central, aching paradox he faced is one that every mature man must grapple with. How do you build a society of tolerance that isn't, in the end, destroyed by the intolerant? Locke's letter. Concerning toleration isn't a naive plea for everyone to just get along. It's a strategic blueprint for peace. He argued with fierce logic that the state has no business regulating the salvation of souls. A magistrate cannot force genuine belief. He can only force hypocrisy. True faith is an internal, voluntary act. It cannot be compelled at the point of a sword. So, in the great and peaceful competition of ideas, Locke believed all beliefs should flourish, save one crucial exception. Let them compete in the marketplace of conscience. Let the best of them rise through reason, not fear. The state's only job, he said, is to keep the peace between them, to make sure no man harms another in life, liberty, or health because of what he believes. It's a breathtakingly modern vision, and a weary one. The vision of a man who had seen enough zealotry to last 1,000 lifetimes. But then, the exception, the crack in the door. Locke, the great champion of tolerance, draws a line. And that line is drawn at those who, by their very doctrine, owe allegiance to a foreign prince, or those who would deny tolerance to others. He would not tolerate the intolerant. It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? A flaw in the philosophy. But is it? Or is it the essential, painful price of survival? Think of it not as hypocrisy, but as the immune system of a free society. A healthy body must tolerate a vast ecosystem of bacteria, but it cannot tolerate a virus that seeks to shut the immune system down. To do so would be suicide. The tolerant man, therefore, must sometimes be a warrior. Not a warrior for a creed, but a warrior for the very framework that allows all creeds to exist. He must be willing to pay the price of vigilance, of exclusion, to preserve the whole. And what is the personal cost of this for you in your daily life? It's the exhaustion of holding the line, the emotional labor of engaging with ideas you find distasteful, while mustering the courage to firmly oppose those that are destructive. It's the difficult discernment between an opponent and an enemy. An opponent believes differently than you, but still plays within the shared rules of the game. An enemy seeks to break the board itself. Locke asks you to tolerate the opponent with a generous spirit, and to stand with quiet firmness against the enemy. This is the mature man's burden. It's far easier to be a zealot, seeing the world in pure black and white. It's also easier to be a pushover, tolerating everything until there's nothing left worth tolerating. The Lockean path lies between the two, a narrow, difficult ridge, steady but steep. It demands a mind that is both open and critical, a spirit that is both generous and resolute. It asks you to pay the price daily of this difficult balance, to be the man who holds the door open, but who knows, with a sad and certain wisdom, when it must be shut and locked, to protect the room where all are welcome to think for themselves. And so we find ourselves here, at the end of our quiet journey, with the keys to our own minds firmly in our grasp, with an understanding of the deep, rumbling power we hold as citizens, and the sobering, noble cost of preserving the space for others to be free. These are not the clamorous thoughts of the day, but the quiet bedrock truths for the night. Let them settle in you, not as problems to be solved, but as truths to be felt. The peace they offer is not loud. It's the peace of understanding your own sovereignty, your own power, and your own responsibility. A peace deep enough and quiet enough to carry you into sleep. Seventh, exploration. What is the unwritten constitution of your own soul? Close your eyes now and let the day begin to drain away. Feel the weight of your responsibilities, the subtle pressures of the world, softening at the edges, becoming a distant murmur. And in this new quiet, I want you to imagine a document, not made of paper and ink, but of something far more permanent. Imagine the framework of your own character, the quiet laws you live by, even when no one is watching, the private amendments you've made to your own nature over the years. This is the unwritten constitution of your soul. And tonight, we sit with the man who first dared to suggest that such a thing exists, and that it is the only true source of legitimate power, John Locke. Picture him not as a statue in a square, but as a man in a quiet room. The air is thick with the scent of candle wax and old paper. It's England, the late 1600s, a world choked by the divine right of kings, a world built on the belief that power flows only downward, from God to monarch to subject. A world where a man's inner life, his conscience, his very mind, was considered property of the crown, to be shaped, to be commanded. And into this world, Locke introduced a whisper of rebellion, one so profound it would one day shake empires. He suggested that before any king, before any parliament, before any government was ever conceived, there was you, a sovereign self, a being born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property, not because a parchment declared it, but simply because you exist. Think of that for a moment. In the silence of this room, in the quiet of your own mind, the rights you hold most dear were not given to you. They were recognized. They were always there, like the bedrock beneath the soil. Locke's genius was seeing that any just government is merely a document, a social contract written to protect this pre-existing, unwritten constitution of the human soul. The government is the servant, and you are the source of its power. But here's the question that lingers in the candle smoke, the question that turns from a historical fact into a personal mirror. If you are the sovereign, what kind of ruler have you been? Have you been a tyrant to yourself, imposing harsh laws of perfection, denying yourself the liberty to rest, to fail, to be human? Have you been a neglectful king, abandoning the throne of your own will, letting others, the noise of the crowd, the expectations of your profession, the endless scroll of another's life on a screen, govern your thoughts and days? Or have you been a wise and gentle steward of this one, precious life you've been given, protecting your liberty to think your own thoughts, defending your property, not just your wallet, but your time, your attention, your peace, governing your own life with justice and compassion for yourself and for those in your care? This is the real, quiet work of freedom. It doesn't happen in the halls of Congress. It happens in the private chambers of your own choices. It is the daily, often silent ratification of your own sovereignty. And as you drift closer to sleep, feel the weight of that crown you were born with. It's been there all along. Feel its rightful place. And decide, in the peaceful darkness, what kind of ruler you will be tomorrow. That question of rule, of sovereignty, leads us naturally to its most tangible expression. Not in crowns or scepters, but in the work of our hands and the focus of our energies. It leads us to the most misunderstood of Locke's ideas, one that speaks directly to the heart of a man's life and his legacy. Eighth exploration. Is property the story your hands tell to the future? We so often shrink this word, don't we? Property. We reduce it to a deed, a title, a number in an account. It becomes a measure of success or a source of anxiety. But let us, for a moment, peel back the layers of modern noise and return to Locke's fundamental, almost poetic definition. For him, property began with the most intimate possession of all, your own person. Every man has a property in his own person, he wrote. You are the one thing in the universe that you truly, indisputably, own. And from this sacred self-ownership, all other property flows. Imagine the very first man, not in a biblical sense, but in a philosophical one. A man standing before an untouched forest, a silent field. He owns himself. He possesses his own mind, his own two hands, his own capacity for labor. He walks into that forest and fells a tree. He hews its wood. He joins it together. He does not simply take. He mixes his labor, the unreclaimable hours of his life, his intention, his skill, with the raw, neutral stuff of the earth. And in that act, the wood is transformed. It is no longer just a tree. It is a beam. It is a chair. It is a shelter. It has been imprinted with a part of his soul. It has become his property. It is the physical manifestation of his time on earth, the story his hands have told to the silent world. Now, bring that concept out of the primal forest and into your own life. That report you stayed late to finish. The garden you tend in the evening light. The engine you repaired. The meal you cooked for your family. The business you built from an idea and a desperate hope. These are not merely tasks. They are your labor, mixed with the raw materials of your day. They are your property in the deepest Lockean sense. They are the artifacts of your life. When you look around at the things you have built or maintained, you are not just looking at objects. You are looking at the crystallized evidence of your time, your effort, your care. You are reading the story your hands have been telling, but this story has a final chapter, one we seldom consider, until we are lying in the quiet, listening to the whisper of our own mortality. What happens to this story when we are gone? Locke saw property not as an end in itself, but as a means to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And a crucial part of that pursuit is the ability to provide, to pass something on, the right to bequeath, to will your property, the physical evidence of your life's labor, to your children, to your loved ones, is the final act of authorship. It is your last chance to tell the future a story about what you valued, who you loved, what you built. It is the ultimate expression of that self-ownership. A man who cannot pass on the fruits of his labor is a man whose story is erased at the final page. So as you lie here, think of your property not as an accountant's ledger, but as your memoir, written in calluses and care, in solved problems and quiet sacrifices. What story are your hands telling? And what do you hope the future reads in its final gifted lines? And so, from the legacy we leave, we come to the final, gentle surrender. The ultimate act of trust, not in a government, but in the generations that will follow. The final freedom is not to hold on forever, but to let go with faith. Ninth exploration. Does true liberty begin when the torch is passed? We spend our lives building, We construct our careers, our homes, our families, our little empires of routine and responsibility. We grip the torch of our own sovereignty so tightly, believing that to let go, even for a moment, is to be plunged into darkness. We fight to protect what is ours, to control our environment, to secure our legacy. This is the natural Lockean impulse, the defense of life, liberty, and estate. It is the work of a lifetime. But Locke, that quiet reasoning voice in the flickering shadows, presents us with a final, deeply counterintuitive paradox. He suggests that the entire magnificent structure of a free society is built not upon our grip, but upon our release. It is built upon our consent, not just to be governed, but to one day stop governing. Think of him again in his study. He is writing of the dissolution of government. A terrifying phrase, isn't it? It speaks of chaos, of the void. But he is not a revolutionary for revolution's sake. He is a man of order, a man of reason. He is describing the ultimate check on power, the right of the people, the true sovereigns, to recall the authority they have lent to their governors. But within this right lies a quieter, more profound truth. It is an acknowledgement of our own temporality. We are not building a society for ourselves alone. We are temporary stewards of a flame that was passed to us, and which we must, one day, pass on. The system is designed to outlive us. Our liberty is secured precisely because it is not dependent on any one king, any one leader, any one generation. It is a trust. It is a story that continues after our chapter is closed. This is the ultimate peace that Locke's vision can offer. It is the freedom from the unbearable weight of permanence. You have done your part. You have mixed your labor with the world. You have governed your own soul with as much wisdom as you could muster. You have told your story with your hands and your heart. And now, you can let go. You can trust that the foundation you stood upon, the foundation of natural rights, of consent, of the unwritten constitution of the human spirit, is strong enough to hold the weight of the future without you. The torch is passed. And in that passing, your own liberty is perfected. It is no longer something you must fight for, or grasp, or defend every moment. It becomes a fact of the universe, as permanent as the rights you always carried within you. It becomes a quiet, eternal truth, like the stars that turn in the sky outside your window, unconcerned with the fleeting lives of the men who sleep beneath them. So tonight, as you feel the pull of sleep, which is itself a gentle rehearsal for that final release, feel the freedom in letting go. Feel the profound trust that the world you helped to build, in your own small way, will continue. Your watch is over. The foundational ideas are secure. The story is in good hands. Your labors are complete. And now, you can rest. 10th exploration. What is the weight of the tabula rasa in a world already written? Close your eyes for a moment and try to remember a time before memory. Not a specific moment from childhood, before that. The very first moment. The blank page of you. The silence before the first note of the song that would become your life. John Locke, in the quiet of his study, his quills scratching softly against parchment by the light of a single candle, gave a name to that profound and empty space. He called it the tabula rasa, the blank slate. It's a beautiful idea, isn't it? A soul unburdened, a mind without prejudice, a self not yet written, a pristine field of untouched snow waiting for the first footprint. It speaks to our deepest hope, the hope for a pure beginning. But tonight, let's not consider it as a theory of mind. Let's consider it as a weight, a responsibility, a quiet, terrifying freedom. Because if we are born blank, then every single thing that has been written upon us, every scar, every golden lesson, every fearful whisper, every unquestioned truth, was placed there by a hand that was not our own. The world, in all its noise and glory and pain, has been the scribe. Your parents, their hopes and fears etched into the soft clay of your conscience. Your teachers, carving pathways of thought you still walk today. Your culture, painting the walls of your perception with its particular palette of colors, telling you what is beautiful, what is success, what is shame. All of it written, and for so much of our lives, we live inside that writing. We mistake the inscription for the slate itself. We believe the handwriting is our own voice. We walk the carved pathways and call it our chosen direction. We look at the painted walls and believe we're seeing the world as it truly is. But what happens in the deep of the night, in the quiet of your own company, when you feel the weight of that slate? When you sense, just for a moment, that the handwriting is not yours, that the person you've become is a collaboration, a consensus, a story written by a committee of ghosts. This is the silent, sobering gift of Locke's simple idea. It's the philosophical equivalent of being handed the deed to a piece of land you've lived on your entire life, only to realize you never knew you owned it. The land is your mind, and the writing upon it is not the land. It's just writing. It can be questioned. It can be revised. It can, with immense courage and patience, be scrubbed away. Imagine the man, 45 years into his life, a successful man by all the definitions written for him. He has the career, the respect, the routine. But there's a hollowness in the center of it all, a faint whisper he dismisses with his morning coffee. It's the whisper of the blank slate, the whisper that asks, is this my success? Or the success I was taught to want? Are these my values? Or the values I inherited? To feel safe? To belong? To truly hear that whisper is to feel the foundation of your world tremble. It's a lonely terror, because to acknowledge the slate is to accept that you are, in a very real sense, the author of your own soul. From this moment forward, and authorship is a terrifying responsibility. It's easier, far easier, to live in the pre-written story, to blame the ghosts, to point to the handwriting and say, this made me who I am. But the man who dares to pick up the slate, who feels its cool, smooth, foundational weight in his hands, enters a new kind of solitude. He walks into the empty room of his own potential, and in that quiet, he must find his own voice. He must choose his own words. This is not a task for the young, who are busy writing with the bold, untested ink of rebellion. This is the task of a man who's lived long enough to see the patterns in the handwriting, who's felt the friction between the life he's living and the man he senses he could be. It's the work of a lifetime, a slow, patient, often painful editing of the self, questioning a fear you've carried since childhood, and deciding whether it's a wise guardian or a foolish jailer. Examining a belief, not for its tribe, but for its truth, for its alignment with your own hard-won experience. Looking at a dream you were chasing and asking, whose dream was this really? This is the true, quiet revolution Locke invites us to. Not a revolution in the streets, but a revolution in the silent study of the mind. It's the reclaiming of the blank slate, not to erase the past, not to dismiss the love and lessons that shaped you, but to become the conscious curator of your own character, to transition from a passive document written by the world to a living, breathing, self-authored text. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, feel the weight of that slate, not as a burden, but as a promise. The world has written its story upon you, but the signature at the bottom, that's yours alone to write, and the pen is in your hand. The echoes of that empty room, that blank slate, are still humming in the air. It's a profound and personal freedom. But a question begins to form in the shadows. A question about what happens when we leave that room and try to build a world with others who carry their own uniquely inscribed slates. The freedom of the self is one thing, but what of the space between selves? 11th exploration. Is the true enemy of liberty a quiet room and a locked door? We often think of tyranny as something loud, a boot stomping, a crowd roaring, a decree shouted from a balcony. It is dramatic, external, a storm that breaks against the walls of a free society. But what if the most insidious enemy of liberty is not a storm? What if it is a stillness? What if it is not the crowd, but the choice to walk away from it? What if the greatest danger is simply a quiet room and a locked door? John Locke, writing his letters concerning toleration, was not merely arguing against kings or magistrates. He was peering into the human heart, into a temptation far more subtle and seductive than the lust for power. It is the temptation of the final answer, the craving for a peace so absolute it requires the silencing of all disagreement. It is the desire to retreat into a private chamber of the soul, to lock the door, and to believe that our truth, our property, our little kingdom, is all that matters. This is the quiet enemy, the liberty of disengagement. Locke saw that a man could be free in a castle and yet be a slave to a smaller, more personal tyranny, the tyranny of his own certainty. He understood that the social contract, that grand and fragile idea, is not just a set of rules for how we are governed. It is a constant, active choice to remain in the conversation, to step out of our quiet, perfectly ordered rooms, and into the messy, noisy, unpredictable public square. It is the choice to tolerate the neighbor whose slate is written in a script we cannot read, whose prayers are whispered to a different silence, whose idea of the good life looks nothing like our own. This is the real work, the hard work, the work that has no glory. It is easier to be a hero in a storm. Much, much harder to be a patient neighbor in a time of quiet tension, to listen to an opinion that feels like an offense to your very soul, and to defend that person's right to speak it. This is the Lockean bargain. You give up the childish dream of a world made in your own image. You surrender the quiet, sterile peace of a room where everyone agrees with you. In return, you get something infinitely more valuable, a world that is alive, a world of discovery, a world where your own ideas are tested, refined, and sometimes, beautifully, broken and remade into something stronger, something truer. The locked door promises safety, but it is the safety of a tomb. The public square promises conflict, but it is the conflict of a living, breathing ecosystem. Think of the man who has built his life, his career, his family. He has earned his quiet room. He has his books, his thoughts, his routine. The world outside is loud, chaotic, often foolish. The temptation is to lock the door, to tend his own garden and let the rest of the world burn. But Locke would whisper that this is where liberty begins to die, not with a bang, but with a sigh. It dies in the heart of the good man who decides that the fight is no longer his fight, that the conversation is no longer worth having, that the freedom of others is not his concern. This is the slow, cold poison, the retreat, the unspoken belief that my liberty ends at my property line. But true liberty, the kind that breathes and grows, is relational. It exists in the space between us, a network of mutual respect, a web of forbearance. When we lock our door, we don't just protect ourselves from the world. We sever a thread in that web. And one by one, as more doors lock, the web withers. What is left is not a collection of free men in castles, but a collection of lonely islands surrounded by a sea of mistrust. And into that sea, the real storms eventually come. So the defense of liberty is not just a grand political act, it is a small, daily discipline. It is the choice to go to the town meeting, even when you are tired. It is the choice to listen to your nephew's half-formed radical ideas without dismissing him. It is the choice to see the person who disagrees with you not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a partner in a shared experiment. The experiment of building a society where disagreement does not lead to destruction. It is the choice to leave the quiet room and to leave the door unlocked. This is the mature man's burden and his glory, to understand that his own freedom is inextricably linked to the freedom of the man whose voice he would rather not hear, that the price of his quiet room is the vigilance of his engagement, that the true citadel of liberty is not a fortress with walls, but a forum without a roof, open to the winds of all human thought. And so we stand in that open forum, feeling the wind of 1,000 different voices, 1,000 different stories written on 1,000 different slates. It is a beautiful, bewildering chaos, and it forces upon us one final, gentle, terrifying question. A question not about the beginning or the middle, but about the end, about the mark we leave and the sound we make when we are gone. 12th. Exploration. When the torch is passed, who listens to the echo of the flame? Every man in the quiet hours wonders about his legacy, the marks he will leave on the world. We think in terms of stone and story, the children we raise, the wealth we accumulate, the great deeds that might bear our name in the history books. We imagine a torch burning bright in our hands, and we hope to pass it on to a worthy successor, to keep the flame alive. It is a noble thought. But John Locke, in his final years, his own body growing frail, his own light flickering, might ask us to consider a different question. What if the true legacy is not the torch itself, but the echo of its flame? What if the most important thing we leave behind is not a thing at all, but a space, a silence shaped by our principles, an emptiness that hums with the memory of our character? We spend our lives building, acquiring, speaking, writing on our own slates, and hoping to write on the slates of others. We want to be heard, to be seen, to be remembered. But Locke's political philosophy, at its very end, is a philosophy of letting go. It is a philosophy of trust. He argued for a government of laws, not of men, precisely because he knew that men are fleeting. Their torches, no matter how bright, must eventually gutter and go out. The genius of his idea was that it designed a system meant to outlive the flaws and failures of any single individual. A machine that could run, more or less, on its own principles, long after the hand that designed it was dust. This is the ultimate act of faith. It is the faith that the echo can be more powerful than the shout, that the rules of the game can be more important than the players, that the constitution of a nation, or the unwritten constitution of a family's values, can become a kind of tuning fork. Struck once, it continues to vibrate long after the hand that struck it has stilled. Think of a father, not at the height of his power, but in his wisdom. He has spent years giving instructions, providing answers, being the solid and certain voice in his children's lives. But his true work, his masterpiece, begins when he stops speaking, when he trusts that the principles he lived by, the respect for reason, the commitment to fairness, the courage to doubt, have been absorbed. They are no longer his rules, imposed from the outside. They have become the internal compass of another human being. His legacy is not his continued control, but their capable independence. His echo. The same is true for a citizen in a free society. Our patriotic duty is not merely to defend our rights in the present. It is to imbue the very idea of rights with such vitality, such reverence, that it becomes a permanent feature of the landscape. Like a mountain or a river, it is to live in such a way that the principles of liberty, tolerance, and self-governance become so deeply embedded in the culture that they do not need a single hero to defend them. They are defended by the collective, unconscious hum of a people who have absorbed them into their very bones. This is a quiet, humble kind of immortality. It requires the ego to step aside. It asks us to find our peace not in being remembered as the great flame, but in having contributed to a light that does not depend on any one of us. The man who needs his name on the building has not yet learned this. The man who needs to control every outcome from beyond the grave is still fighting a battle with mortality he cannot win. But the man who understands the echo, he tends his flame with care, not because it is his, but because he is its temporary keeper. He speaks his truth, not to dominate the conversation, but to add his unique tone to the great, collective resonance. He lives a good life, so that the space he leaves behind is not a void, but a fertile silence, ready for the next season of growth. So as you feel sleep pulling you now into a world without time, consider your own echo, not the loud public achievements, but the quiet, private principles, the integrity no one saw, the kindness that asked for no reward, the doubt you allowed to refine your certainty, the tolerance you showed when it was difficult. These are the vibrations you set in motion, long after the torch has been passed, long after the sound of your voice has faded from memory. That echo will remain, a subtle tuning of the universe, a faint, beautiful note in the great, silent symphony of what it means to be free. And it is enough. It is more than enough.